There are two sides who are exceedingly confident of victory at the moment in the top flight, but I'm going to pick out one of them in particular, which is Middlesex, who posted their second victorious result of the season in the second round of matches. The defending champions Warwickshire also chalked up their first win. Let's start at Lords, though, where perhaps the result flattered Middlesex after Derby had pushed their hosts all the way through the first 6.5 sessions. Vishy, did you see any of this one?
I didn't see much of it, to be honest, but from doing the roundups, spoke to Alan Gardner, who was at the game, and even from the week before, you really got the impression that Middlesex's bowling attack is ridiculous, really. I mean, Warwickshire's obviously won them the title last year, but if anything, what history's shown that you need to convert those draws into wins, and Middlesex seem to have the attack to do that. Harris got a hamstring injury, apparently the first of his career, which is interesting. And they brought Stephen Finn in, which isn't too bad, really. I mean, Finn's obviously not going to be there for the whole summer. Harris will probably be there for the whole summer. Who knows what would happen to Roland Jones? I mean, to finish an innings with a hat-trick is pretty good going. And, I mean, the guys up top, Rogers, as Jarrod mentioned, scoring runs, doing the business. Robson as well. Robson, who's also eligible for Australia. So, I mean, you never know.
We'll have anyone.
But yeah, they're the form team at the moment. Obviously, they're not playing the next round, so people will catch up. But I mean, with Warwickshire drawing against Derbyshire, obviously because of the weather, and Middlesex beating Derbyshire, Derbyshire at home, they might finish bottom, but that's already Middlesex essentially already won up on Warwickshire. So no, it's been they're the team to beat.
Definitely the team to beat. Nasha, speaking afterwards, Gus Fraser talked about the fact that you don't win a championship in April, which is pretty obvious. But he was purring about his attack, and he was obviously a member of that team that won back in '93, the last time Middlesex won the title. So, I mean, they've started as well as they could do.
They have. He's still not entirely happy, is he, Angus Fraser? It takes quite a lot for Gus to crack a smile, but he must have a sense of pride over how his bowling attack is working. Of course, when they won the title back in '93, it was an attack centred around twin spinners in John Embry and Phil Tufnell. So this is obviously a different dynamic that Middlesex are working to this time around. But I mean, as Vishy was saying, they are almost the dream county attack in that you have 3 or 4 seamers that are interchangeable. So even if you lose a guy to injury like they have done, or you lose a guy to England like they will do, you've got another guy to slot in. The only question mark about their attack is if we get a warm, dry summer and pitches start to turn and perhaps seamers become slightly less effective, whether they have the spin options to really mount a challenge. Ollie Rayner is a workman-like spinner, but probably not much more. So that'll be interesting. But if they can if they can put runs on the board, a pace bowling attack of that skill will get wickets in whatever conditions, and reverse swing will play a part if the summer becomes dry and warm as well. And people like
Nasha, how good is Toby Rowland-Jones? I've seen him maybe once or twice a couple of years ago, but he just seems a bit like Mark Davies. He just trips over wickets, but I don't know if that's, he's just a county seamer who gets lucky, or if he's really international class.
I've always thought he's got the makings of an England bowler. He's got height. He bowls at that back of the length. Not quick. He's probably no more than kind of mid-80s, but dare I say sort of Glenn McGrath-esque in that sort of mould, that he hits that back of the length, moves off the seam, makes very good use of the slope at Lords, obviously is his home ground. And I do know that a couple of England selectors have had an eye on him for the last 2 or 3 years. He has, a bit like Mark Davies' example you drew, I mean, he has had a few injury problems over his career, but he strung together a good season last year. If he can string together even a good half a season this year, I think he'll be very close, especially the way England are needing to build their pack of pace bowlers. Graham Onions' fortunes dip slightly in the winter, so it remains to be seen quite where he remains in the pack. And you've got Tim Bresnan, we don't quite know how he's going to pull up from his latest elbow surgery. So if you have people like Roland Jones, you've got Chris Wright at Warwickshire is another one in the frame. I think you might see, come the Ashes or certainly come the winter tours, that 1 or 2 of these bowlers might well be in the frame. And I suspect Toby Rowland-Jones will play Test cricket for England in the next couple of years.
That's really good, because he once bowled me out in a charity game bowling spin, so I can say that I went out to a Test cricketer.
Well, you can, Jarrod. I'm sure it's not the only Test cricketer that you've fallen to.
Steve Elworthy bowled me last 2 summers back as well.
There you go. Chris Wright was the name I was going to pick up on in that match where Warwickshire were at home for the second week in succession, blessed with some better weather this time. They overcame Durham, 6 for 31 from Chris Wright, and it secured victory with 46 overs to spare. As Nash has just mentioned there, Vishy, I mean, he does look like another one of these England bowlers in waiting.
Yeah, I remember the first time I saw him, it might have been a couple of years ago, and I remember thinking he was quite slight. And even last season, he's not in the similar mould as these the likes of Tim Mills, anyone who spent any kind of time at the academy or the England performance squads. They seem to be, put them in grow bags over the winter, and they come back looking like boxers. But Wright definitely looks a lot bigger this year. There's certainly
I can pick up that theme if you want, because it's a valid point he's making, that the bowlers that spend time at Loughborough do come out bulked up. They spend a winter on fitness, but I don't think there's an identikit formula for fast bowlers. Chris Wright as well is slightly more advanced in his career. He's obviously been to a few counties before he's found this home at Warwickshire. He's an interesting one. He's sort of he's almost come out of nowhere in the last 12 months, hasn't he, since he helped Warwickshire to the title last year. He went on the Lions tour, and he admitted it was interesting when he spoke to Alex Winter, who was at the game at Edgbaston last week. He was asked about his experiences on the Lions tour, and said it was one where you had to keep your head up. Obviously, the England Lions had a pretty awful tour. I think they lost every game on that trip, and it showed up a few of the players. But Chris Wright was using it as an experience. Well, look, I've been out there, I've sampled Australian conditions, and I know what it's about. And sometimes in April, I'm not saying wickets come easily for fast bowlers, but they can come easily for fast bowlers in April in England. So it's no bad thing for young quicks to have to go away and work really hard and even have some tough times overseas, because as we just saw in the winter tour in New Zealand, wickets aren't easy to come by on some test pitches these days. So you don't want bowlers to be too flattered by their figures in April. So I think those times when they've got to work hard are good, and it will stand Chris Wright in good stead. I think he's a little bit further away.
Sorry, Nash. The bulking up thing I find interesting, because if you look at England's fast bowlers, for instance, you've got Broad, Finn, and Anderson, I suppose, is the main three at the moment. None of the three of them are actually that bulky, and yet a lot of these guys coming through these academies now are coming up very, very big. And if you look at people like Flintoff and Harris, I mean, I'm just not sure that you need to be that big in order to bowl quick, and I think it can actually hold you back. So whether what they're trying to do is get general strength into them in one summer and just actually improve their frame, and knowing that maybe they may break down or maybe they may not do as well, but in future years they'll be better off. There must be a tactic there, because there's no doubt that you see these kids come out of with that Sky clip a couple of years ago, you could see the bowler go into the academy and come out of it on the documentary they made, and they were definitely a lot bigger at the end than they were at the beginning. And it is something that we still don't quite know the physiology of bowling. As you said before, Nasha, you've got skinny bowlers who can bowl really quickly, and muscular bowlers who don't bowl very quickly. Tino Best and Stephen Finn are completely different body types, yet probably bowl similar pace.
I think as well the key thing with that is they've clearly gone. They'll come in waves now. You'll see, the likes of Tim Mills. Meek is a big lad as well, and he's not really that tall. But I think it's more concentrating on their core, because obviously that's where you have the issues with your lower back and things like that. And if you have a strong core, as you see with boxers as well, the boxers who tend to last the longest are the ones with the strongest core. Someone like Hatton, for example, who often would put on a lot of weight and lose a lot of weight, that would actually be detrimental, because his body, specifically his center of gravity and his core, won't be used to carrying that kind of weight consistently. So the longer you have bowlers of that size bowling and going about their lives, you will see that their bodies will become a lot more comfortable to the rigours of bowling quickly for a long period of time as well.
Right, let's move on, because Warwickshire play against Somerset and Taunton, with the latter county coming into the match off the back of that draw at the Oval, which attracted so much attention. I think first match, Graeme Smith in charge, first match of the new Surrey breed, as it were, and the first match since the Tom Maynard inquiry. Just how much emotion was running through that game, and in the end, what do you feel, Vishy, was the final outcome of it, other than obviously it was a draw? But Graeme Smith seemed very upbeat.
Yeah, he did. I went to the Surrey press day when he gave his first press conference as Surrey captain, and I was impressed by him. It's hard not to be impressed by Graeme Smith. He's a big guy. He's a lead from the front, have a captain, and
core.
very good core. Oh, I wanted to poke it. I didn't. I should have done though. But he seems exactly the right type of person for. Sorry, lucky in the fact that they can afford someone like Smith to come in and lead that team. I think it does help that he wasn't there last year because of the Tom Maynard tragedy and everything that's emanated from that. On the pitch, he seemed to do all right. I know on the last day, certain people wondering about whether he should have been a bit more proactive, but I think their first game of the season, he led them quite well. He would have been disappointed with Mika. I know there was a lot of talk of why Mika got the nod ahead of Tremler. They assured everyone in the box, the chocolate voice George Bell as well, that the Tremler was fit, and merely they were just picking Mika ahead of him, who did disappoint. I know Dernbach bowled very well, not very Dernbachian in that sense, but he seemed to at least show a desire to want to bowl for 4 days. I don't know, it's hard to say. I think they'll be there or thereabouts at the end of the season. I know that's quite easy to say because they've spent a bit of money, they've got a few people in. But I do think Smith would be a very, very big part of that. Like I said, it's hard not to be impressed by the man.
Stephen Davis also managed to get some runs, Nasha. Timely reminder from him before the start of this summer?
Timely reminder, and just good for him as well. I mean, we talk about the impact of that last year had on the club. He was one of the ones most severely impacted. He's spoken. There's a piece on the site today about how he did consider shelving cricket altogether and moving on. And obviously, it's been well publicised. His friendship with Elton John over the winter has helped him. He went on tour with Elton, and he's come back.
So did I.
He did, yes. He's come back and seems refreshed and revived. Look, I think he's a long way down the England pecking order of keepers now. You've got Bairstow, Butler, you've got Keys, Vetters probably still in the mix. He's been named in the performance squad and things like that, so he's still in the selector's thoughts. But I mean, it's just great when a cricketer who's been through a tough time seems to come out the other side of it, and now it's just about him kicking on for the rest of this season, having a really good season, enjoying his cricket again, and then we'll see where he is come September, and maybe then we can start talking about him again as a possible number 2 to Matt Fryer.
Alvaro Peterson's been signed by Somerset, and at present, Jarrod, looks as though he could well be the overseas signing of the season.
Yeah, it's also, I mean, I hope he can spell Somerset. I believe it was Alvaro who signed with Glamorgan a couple of years back and then misspelt their name in his tweets for a little while. Look, he's an interesting player because he's very limited. I suppose he might even be, similar to Eddie Cowan in that you look at him and you sort of think as a bowler, I reckon I can work this guy out. And I think I'll be able to get him out. But there's something about him. He does fight his way through an innings, and he's clearly good enough at Test level to do that. So he would be a very handy player at first class level, and I could see him doing quite well. He's obviously already started well. I think it could on Somerset wickets. He's not the sort of batsman I would like to bowl against because he sort of digs himself into a pitch and stays there for as long as he wants. And Somerset, that usually means a lot of runs.
Well, he'll get a chance to try it out on the Taunton wicket when they take on Warwickshire in their next game. Surrey are against Sussex at home, which should give a fairly good early season indication about the title aspirations of both of those teams. Sussex, of course, as I will remind you on every show, Nash's pick for the title. And then we got Durham against Yorkshire. In the same way, Nash, that Gus Fraser said, look, you can't pick who's going to win the title in April. Nothing's decided. Is it too early to talk about Durham against Yorkshire being a potential, what would be termed in footballing parlance, six-pointer?
It's a little bit early. I think what is important for both these teams is to start getting their top orders to fire. I mean, in their week off, Yorkshire had a 3-day friendly against Lancashire. There's ever such a thing as a friendly against Lancashire. And their top order was again in a bit of trouble until Bairstow hit a century, which is important for him, and Adil Rashid hit 100 as well. But you don't want your numbers 5 and 6 to have to continually bail you out. So, and that's a problem Durham are having in an even greater way to Yorkshire. I mean, their game against Warwickshire, Edgbaston, that we've already spoken about, they were 30 for 5 or something like that, I think, in the first innings and they collapsed to 100 all out in the second. They needed 100 from Scott Borthwick and a typically gutsy show from Paul Collingwood to at least give them something to aim at in that first inning. So as good a bowling attack as Durham have, they can't be relying on the likes of Onions and Rushworth and Thorpe to bail them out. So they need runs from top order. If they don't, then although I supported them staying up perhaps in earlier shows, I think they could be in trouble come later in the season.
Fishy just noticed that we were about to start talking about the second division and disappeared, but he has actually...
Sure, they're talking about Northern cricket. They haven't mentioned London for about a minute and a half now. I'm sorry, I'm not going to be able to handle that. One other game, I mean, what Nasha said was very interesting, but I was just thinking back to that Surrey-Sussex game. That will be interesting for the Rory H. Brown, the other HB, as he's known around ESPN circles. Him coming back to Surrey, I'm very interested in that. But are we going to talk about how bad Essex are? Because I'd like to apologise to all the Essex fans for my performance of recent times, and I will try and do better.
Well, what have you been doing so badly for Essex, Jarrod?
Oh, it wasn't me, it was them, was it? But, I could have supported them more, couldn't I? It's an amazing thing this early in the season for, a coach to come out and basically say, yeah, we really were pants. We will try and be less pants in the future. But we want you to know we were that bad.
It's weird. It was very football managery, wasn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
It's quite... it's not unprecedented, is it? But it's rare that county coaches will go mid-season. I think I remember it happening to Leicestershire a couple of years ago. But you've got to have decent money on Paul Grayson won't survive this season, I think, because certainly if things don't book up in the next couple of weeks, you notice on Twitter there's there's a bit of a groundswell of a voice against him now. The supporters are getting a bit fed up in the fact that their championship form's been poor for so long. I think this was they've only won 9 in 50 or something, that Tim Wigmore, who was at the game for us, was saying. And there seems to be this obsession with one-day cricket, and which is fine up to a point if you can create a one-day dynasty like Gloucestershire did or something like, or Leicestershire did. But Essex haven't even really shown that. They've had the odd glimpse, often powered through the likes of Graeme Napier or something like that, but they've not really suggested forming a kind of a long-standing era of Essex success in one-day cricket. So I think the club needs to decide exactly what direction they're going to go. I mean, another point Tim made was they're producing a lot of talented young cricketers. We've spoken about Mills on this show already. You've got Ruth Topley, you've got Tom Wesley. You had Ben Folkes, who is obviously now who is now vying for wicketkeeper's spot with James Foster. They had Adam Wheater, who has now moved to Essex. So they're producing talent. There just seems a bit of a roadblock about where that talent then goes once it hits the first team. So I think it's a really important few weeks coming up for Essex.
Very important, and very important to remember that they were George's pick to win the second division title. I just want to remind everyone about that. But hugely important as well has been the performance of Northants here. I think that because Northants won this game so convincingly, lots of people are talking about how bad Essex were, including their own coach. But it's deflecting a little from the fact that Northants were very good.
Yes, I mean, it was a fantastic performance from them. I mean, I certainly didn't expect them to be anywhere near promotion at the start of the season, but David Willey's in fantastic form. He's providing some balance to their team. Trent Copeland, who someone Jarrod will no doubt know a bit about, he looks another solid overseas signing. We talked about Alvira Peterson, whether he could be one of the signings of the season. I mean, Trent Copeland at the moment is only signed for the first, I think it's 7 or 8 championship games. They're already in discussions about maybe bringing him back for the latter part of the season. He's one of those players who, as long as he isn't named in the overnight Ashes squad, which we talked about earlier, which is very unlikely, he's a real solid overseas signing.
Well, also with Copeland, if you think about it, you really only need to sign him for about the first 6 or 7 games, really, because he will do all of his damage at this time of the year. I mean, he's a guy who can swing it both ways, who can hit the seam whenever he wants to. He's very slow, but, in counting conditions, that's not always the worst thing. He's a perfect signing. Steve McGoffin did the same thing at the start of last year. These sorts of players are very, very important in county cricket early in the season. If you're going to play all these games in April and May, it's a very good time to have a tall international bowler for a few weeks, even if you can't get him for the entire season.
And it's not going to be something terrible with Bob Quine again, is it? Where Essex have only called him up, so they only called him up for the April and May months, so that when batting gets a bit better, they'll invite Phil Hughes back, will they?
Hey, Quine will be fine. He can bat in any month, just not a test.
The other thing I was going to say about Trent Copeland as well, he's found himself at number 11 in Northampton, and he's got first class hundreds to his name, and obviously he put on a 100 and plenty with Stephen Crook, and Northampton's last 2 wickets put on 220 at 6 and over, and that's what got Paul Grayson particularly mad. So, I mean, Northampton, while not having any, shall we say, standout individuals, they certainly have depth in that batting order, and you have people like Crook and Copeland coming in lower down. So they're another top order that has not necessarily fired this season, but again, I suppose you can look at Warwickshire in the First Division too, another batting order where their 7, 8, 9, 10 jack are quite powerful and could yet get them to some really competitive totals for the bowlers to work with.
Northampton play against Gloucestershire next. Glamorgan have got the week off, but they managed to get their first win in Cardiff against Worcestershire for 42 years, thanks to Jim Allenby mostly. He was a standout performer with bat and ball. I mean,
does he qualify for Australia as well?
I don't know. You're clutching at straws with some of these guys. I mean, you have people like Robson who genuinely does qualify for Australia.
I think Allenby might as well.
Yeah, I think Allenby does, doesn't he?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he's an Aussie. We'll claim anyone.
You need them all. But, I mean, I just wondered, I mean, was this a surprising result for you, Vish? Because at the start of the season, I think most people were just expecting Glamorgan to be hanging out the bottom. I
think people think that of Glamorgan every season. I think Glamorgan could sign the South African side and they'd still be Glamorgan, you know. It's interesting, we, for All Out Cricket, we did a massive Q&A with quite a few captains, and Mark Wallace was one of them. And he genuinely seemed to think that they could, you know, cause people some trouble this year, and maybe even be at the right side of the table and do some damage in the one-day game. I think
Vishy's gone into slow motion talking about this.
I can take up Vishy's point again, because I was going to say, I think before we get overexcited about Glamorgan's result, we can mention it was against Worcestershire, who look really thin this year, more so than other seasons, although it has to be said that Alan Richardson is still charging in and bowling a huge number of overs for even only the second week of the season. But I think before we get too much into judging quite where Glamorgan sit, we do need to see them against perhaps some of the stronger Division 2 teams. Although one player who I think is worth keeping an eye on, and one that Tim picked out in his county column this week, is Mike Reid, the young fast bowler. I've not seen him bowl live yet, so I'm taking other people's word on this, but he's got some people excited about it. He's got height, he's got a bit of pace. So it'll be interesting to see how he develops over the season.
Is he got a good core?
And I don't think he's Australian, Jarrod, so I'm afraid you can't have him.
Now, we're okay for bowlers. It's just anyone who can hold a bat. I mean, Copeland might get picked as a batsman.
He could be on number 6.
Yeah.
That would be fantastic if a number 11 in the county game in the second division got picked as number 6 for the Australian starting 11.
About a month ago, 2 months back, we had Glenn Maxwell, who's batting at number 8 for Victoria, opening the batting for Australia. So, like I said, we'll take anyone, anyway, anyhow.
So will we in this hangout, because Vishy's back, and he's hopefully not going to be in slow motion now. But a final game to look at, and then with an eye on next week, because I know that we've got Nasher, who's going to be going across to watch Lancashire against Kent. And Kent, who was struggled to be a team who were going to be pushing for promotion this season, had a slow start to the season because they've been held up really in both of their matches, and so they've drawn. So I mean, an interesting one you're going to get to see them play here against Lancashire.
Yeah, I quite like what's happened down at Kent since Jimmy Adams has taken charge. He's made some shrewd recruitments. He's brought in some solid county cricketers on a tight budget. So it'll be interesting to see how they go. I hope Matt Coles gets a game. I'm interested to see him. He had a difficult winter with the England Lions. Him and Ben Stokes, of course, were sent home after their issues they had in Australia. So it'll be interesting to see how he's pulling himself together. He was an England Lions cricketer this time last summer too, when they played against West Indies. So always good to see how players bounce back from disappointment. Of course, it's also James Anderson's first game of the season for Lancashire. So it'll be interesting to see how he sits back into competitive cricket. He's got a couple of games minimum before the New Zealand series starts, so he'll be hoping for some fine weather so he can work through the gears ahead of the Test series.
So next week's games: Gloucestershire, Northampton, Hampshire, Worcester, and Lancashire against Kent.